in the small, all things in and beyond our view. We bow in gratitude to unite our thinking, for we all worship you. For we recognize the world you created provides a marvelous womb for us. Yet how you created, when and why remain issues for us to discuss. This evening, we focus our attention on the story of the Mulekites and how they traveled, where they landed, what are their possible residential sites. And we thank you for our guest presenter, Boyd Tuttle, who comes prepared to offer explanation of how the Mulekites traveled and how they fared. Bless him with patience with us, Lord, we pray, that we'll understand with clarity the words he has to say. And may we gain understanding of creation's mystery as we embrace the fascinating segment of Book of Mormon history. We are diverse in our backgrounds, facing pandemics of COVID, lying, racism, poverty, and grief. Yet we come together in this new year in the hope your spirit will lead us into relief. And we pray for one another despite religious and cultural differences, and ask your blessing on all our participants to have open, teachable senses. Guide us with your spirit. Let us feel your gentle nudge. Let all our senses be awakened. Let us defer the inclination to judge. And as we give consideration to his research, his perspective, and his point of view, we ask that your spirit guide us to recognize that which is true. Amen. All right, Boyd, I want to stop the share and turn it over to you. Thank you for coming to share with us.
Well, thank you. I'm going to test my audio right now. Is it coming through all right?
You're fine.
Okay, great. Let's see if I can share my screen here. Is that showing up there?
Yes.
Okay. Well, thank you for the invitation to join with you again, Paul and Robert and everybody. It's always a pleasure to take part in your forum. I'm impressed with what you do here, with the spirit in which it's done, the breadth of dialogue that is able to happen here. I think it's remarkable. I think it's a good example of the kind of conversations that we ought to have in many cross I'll call it cross-cultural or cross-denominational type fora. And so thank you for that. So today I'm going to basically review the expedition and bring you up to date on some of the more recent things that have happened. There's been quite a lot of activity just within the last month that's been remarkable, to say the least. But I'll share that kind of toward the end. So I'm going to kind of blast through my slides here, and I have to tell you right up front, as far as the Kingmen thesis, that's intriguing to me. It's not one that I've done much looking into, and I'm going to be interested in reading up on that idea. I think it's an interesting concept. Well, so you can capture my information here, anybody. I apologize for my whatever, I won't call it COVID. I've had COVID a year ago, so I haven't got it again, but just a lingering cold, I guess, that I'll have to clear my throat from time to time. But anyway, I have my contact information here and my phone number. Anyone's welcome to reach out to me afterward if you'd like to and get additional information. As Paul said, I do publish for a living. I didn't do that 10 years ago. I used to work in New York for a big, large Fortune 500 corporation. And I did that for 27 years. And I got my dream job, which was to be a vice president of the company. And I had the job offered to me. And as things unfold, I ended up not accepting the job because I had this profound prompting that just said, no, that's not for you, Boyd. It's time for you to take another path. And so after 27 years of thinking I knew what I was doing, I was kind of guided to not do that anymore. And I literally just took a a severance package instead from the company, and had 18 months of full pay, which was generous in those days. But it was 18 months in which to reinvent myself and figure out how I was going to replace what was a very sizable income. And it led me down this path that I had honestly no idea that it would bring me to where I am today. But here I am, 10 years later, and having met some remarkable people and having been able to publish their research, their findings, their studies and so forth. And I've really learned to respect men and women who pay the price of honest toil. And I really don't care about their credentials, their PhDs, or whatever follows their name, as much as I do about their focus, their intensity, their passion, because that trumps all of those other things in my view. And I've been able to publish a lot of people that otherwise probably wouldn't have found the publisher for their works. And they've been some very profound, game-changing kinds of things in my view. Well, anyway, all that led me to meeting this remarkable individual named Philip Beale, who is the expedition leader that we'll be talking about tonight. In my meetings with him, he ended up inviting me to join his crew in September of 2019, when we left from Carthage, Tunisia, to sail the Phoenicia 2600 BC replica across the Atlantic Ocean. And that was a stunning thing to me. The second most stunning thing after his invitation to join them was the fact that my wife said, "Sure, why not?" That was another shocker. So, but it just felt right. And so we pursued it. We went forward with it. And so that's what we'll be talking about today. I do have, there was an article that was run in LDS Living about the time in September. And this is the title of it. You can see here, this is an actual screenshot of the article. And in it, there's a discussion about, what was about to happen here. And I've just captured a few of the paragraphs from that article. And it says that a Latter-day Saint publisher will embark on a never before attempted expedition, which hopes to retrace the path Mulek's people once followed to arrive to the promised land around 600 BC, based on his belief that Mulek traveled west aboard a Phoenician sailing vessel. Tuttle surmises Mulek escaped detection because his mother was spirited out of the city with the child king before the siege, or more likely, she kept him safe within her womb. And in the year and a half or 2 years now that I've really been focused and studied on this, I've come to the conclusion even more that that's the only way Zedekiah probably could have survived the onslaught of Nebuchadnezzar, was to be an unknown child. Otherwise, had he been known in any way, his mother would have been tracked down, or he would have been tracked down, and his life would have been ended. Of course, it still remains at some degree of speculation at this stage, but there are some supporting evidences that I've been able to see. So I'm going to skip through these a little bit. I could just kind of set it here. And so I believe that in the Book of Mormon, we read about 3 migrations from not Jerusalem, but from the old world. Of course, the Jaredites in the first place. And it's not clear. I mean, I don't know if anybody out there has a clear idea of which way the Jaredites sailed. Their history is quite vague, and so truncated, that we really don't have a good handle on which ocean they crossed, which path they took, and so forth. We know a lot about the construction of their vessels, but not a lot about the path they followed. But we have 2 other migrations that we actually have a lot more information about, and that would, of course, be Nephi's and Lehi's voyage. We know I don't think there's any really debate over the path that they took as they left Jerusalem through Saudi Arabia and then east across, coming out somewhere in Oman or Qatar, and then leaving from the southern Arabian Peninsula. Of that, there's virtually no dispute. And so that one actually was one of the voyages that was accomplished by this ship, Phoenicia, and that was over 10 years ago. And then the next voyage that this ship took was the one that I was a part of, and that was the one we engaged in 2019. in September. So Philip Beale, my hat's off to Philip, a remarkable individual, really got to know him well. And he's a man driven by this desire to recreate ancient maritime history. And he did say this, I welcome Tuttle on board, but it's no pleasure cruise. And that I can attest to. So, in the description of the Jaredites, it's very much detailed description about the ship, how they built it using timbers and tight like unto a dish and so on and so forth. And then we have Nephi and Lehi and building his ship. I mean, we know that it was built not like unto the manner of men. It was built out of hewn timbers. It had a single sail, most likely. It sailed before the wind. That generally implies a ship that does not have a triangular sail, or that can cut against or with the wind, or against the wind also. It implies that it's a single sail that sails with the wind, which is exactly what you have in a Phoenician type of design. Now, then when we get to Mulek and his entourage, we don't have any discussion at all about a construction of a ship. It's just they crossed the great waters, right? So in fact, it says, well, let's see, we're jumping through here. This is my article. And so it just went on to talk about how I found this to be quite fascinating. The fact that the people of Mulek and the people of Nephi lived in the land of promise for almost 400 years and never saw each other, never encountered each other. So I think we can learn something from that. One thing we certainly can take away is this was not a very small geographic area, right? For 400 years to not encounter another, population center indicates that there was some distance between them, right? And it's also really remarkable as I did some research on this, that, my query was, are there Phoenician words in the Book of Mormon? And frankly, I'm not a expert in languages. So I did some research down that path, and sure enough, there are Phoenician words in the Book of Mormon. There's dozens of them. And what's really interesting is that there are no Phoenician words before these two parties met. And you got to think about that. Wow. People say that Joseph Smith just wrote the Book of Mormon, out of his own mind. It was a narrative that he made up. Well, if he did, he had to be really thinking about not to include any Phoenician words before they met up with the people of Mulek. I mean, just the logistics of the mental gymnastics that you'd have to do to invent this text. Really, to me, that's just a powerful witness to the veracity of the narrative that Joseph put forward. Obviously, I've pointed out the word Sidon, which we've already mentioned. Sidon was one of the major cities in Lebanon. And obviously it's a Phoenician word. It's where the Lebanese, or where the Phoenician civilization really got its start. All right, so yeah, at the end of the day, I just said, it's one thing to sit around and Google information, but it's another to actually go where the ancients went in the vessel identical to one they traveled in, to learn about this experience. And for me, that did prove out to be the case. It certainly opened my mind to a lot of possibilities. I also, one of my favorite church leaders is Elder Jeffrey Holland. And I went to this talk that he gave in August of 2017, and I was motivated and propelled forward, I think, in my desire to do this trip, even though I didn't know about it at the time I heard this speech. When the opportunity came along, this certainly came to my mind. And I loved what he said. He says, our testimonies are not dependent on evidence, but not to seek for and not to acknowledge intellectual documentable support for our belief when it is available is to needlessly limit an otherwise incomparably strong theological position and deny us a unique persuasive vocabulary in the latter-day arena of religious investigation and sectarian debate. And I also have this quote here on my wall that I keep, and it reads, "What no one shows the ability to defend is quickly abandoned. Rational argument does not create belief, but it maintains a climate in which belief may flourish." And that's a quote from Austin Farrar. In fact, Jeff Holland quotes it a number of times in other talks. And it's the idea that while that's not necessarily going to create faith or create belief, it does create an atmosphere or an environment where faith can flourish. And I think, engaging in this voyage for me was exactly one of those exercises. Now, I think you all are old enough to remember this episode with Thor Heyerdahl and some of his story in history with the Raw expeditions, where he took, ancient designs and then attempted to recreate history. And that's essentially what Philip Beale was trying to do. In fact, he was inspired by Thor Heyerdahl. And it's interesting to me that the church back in the 70s took a lot of interest in what Heyerdahl was doing and even featured it in the New Era magazine. And that's a picture of it here. And they arranged an interview with him and so forth. And it was an exciting thing to feature in the church at the time. And then I asked the question, why don't we ever talk about this? Which is interesting. If you look at what happened, the Raw 1 and the Raw 2 expeditions, while they were, informative, they weren't exactly connected to the Book of Mormon narrative really in any way. The locations they departed from, the manner of the construction of the ship, these are not hewn timbers. There really is almost no connection to the Book of Mormon. And so even though it was exciting to think about, they really didn't do anything to forward, the narrative or the argument that was being set forth by the narrative of the Book of Mormon, which is that that there were ancient connections from the old world to the new. His Raw expeditions largely didn't succeed in showing that there was regular travel. And today, no one really considers those to be representative of ancient New World migrations. So that's just for what it's worth. So the question is, what has changed? What happened in the interim since 1977 until today that allowed this new type of expedition, the Philip Beale expedition? What happened that allowed it to take place? Well, this is answered by the name Jules Verne 7. Okay, so Jules Verne 7 was a ship that was found. The wreckage in this picture is not the actual ship that was found. It wasn't found in that kind of condition. In fact, matter of fact, it was not found in the ocean. The ship itself was found on land as they were digging in some reclaimed land. You know how they push the dirt out into the bay and cover things up and build construction? Well, they were digging a foundation for a new building. I think it was a theater. And they started digging up some boards and things, and they wondered what it was. And they called in archaeologists to check it out. And lo and behold, they found this hull of a ship that was stuck in the mud and had been preserved amazingly well. And as you can see here, it was preserved up to the third whale. The most remarkable characteristic is the double assembly system consisting of the mortise and tenon joints for most of the hull and lashing for certain other parts, and frames are directly nailed to the hull with iron nails. And then Professor Patrice Paumet, Frenchman, was the gentleman who headed up the archaeological study on an excavation of this craft, which he named the Jules Verne 7. And he ended up dating it to 600 BC. So that became, vitally important to the discussion. Now, here is an actual design layout of what the Phoenicia design based on the Jules Verne 7. So you can get a rough idea. It's 67 feet long. It's about 22 feet wide and weighs 50 tons, of which about 20 tons of that was just the ballast in the bottom of the hull. And you notice in this image, in this picture here, all of these little pegs that are sticking out. I have in another slide, but unfortunately not part of this. Well, actually, I think I can show you in the next page here. So pay attention to those pegs because they are vital to how this whole construction worked. And what you see here is they've got this tongue and groove type of a joint here. This is the mortise and the tenon that would hold these two pieces together. And then they had olive wood dowels that they would drive through there to hold the tenon in place in the mortise, and it would join these together. And then when the ship was then put into the water, what happens with wood? It swells, and the swelling of the wood caused these seams here to become super tight and air and watertight. And so the ship is amazingly well designed and watertight. And it proved to be just that when, in fact, they put it in the water. There is a lot of people ask, well, what was it? What was the ship built out of? And I can tell you the cedars, Lebanese cedars of Lebanon. We all hear about that, right? In the Old Testament, cedars of Lebanon. That's actually a kind of pine for the keel and the mast, and the ribs and wall planks were made of Aleppo pine, and walnut for this for the tenon here that went in the middle, Mediterranean pine, cypress, olive wood for the tenons, and then also iron nails. And so it settles the question, did these ancients in 2,600 years ago, 600 BC, were they metallurgists? And the answer is yes, absolutely. They were working in iron and steel, and there's quite a lot of evidence to demonstrate that fact. And now the discovery of the Jules Verne 7 essentially proved that they were using iron. All right, moving through here. So there's a close-up view of this. Yep, showing how that works. All right, so not only that, now one of the things that was not left on the Jules Verne 7 was the rudders. The rudders had rotted away, and they were nothing left of the rudders. And so it was a bit of a mystery, but you could see from these ancient carvings, like you see in this stone carving here, go back, you could see that the rudders, they had dual rudders, one on each side. And also look at the detail in here. You can see these lines that go up here, and something called brailing lines, which taught us a lot about how they managed the sail. And if you have questions about brailing, I can talk about that, but this is really interesting. And also there were a lot of Greek urns that had detailed paintings on the sides of the urns and vases that showed some of the detail that allowed Philip and his building team to make the design that he believes is quite accurate and correct to what the original would have been. Now, we found out right away when he first sailed the ship around the Africa that the forces that are applied on these rudders is incredibly high. And they had to design and redesign those rudders several times. In fact, this gentleman here from Indonesia was our boatwright, and his name was Sudirman, and he was indispensable. I mean, this guy could take baling wire and rope and wood and almost fix anything. But he's back here working on the rudder. This was I think the day before we left from Tunisia, doing some final corrections and so forth. This is what happened to the first rudder that they sailed with. You can see it snapped off in high seas. And that problem was resolved just by trial and error. They figured out how to place the joints and the rotation points to allow it to withstand those forces. All right, so what I've mentioned is that this ship is actually responsible for 2 expeditions. The first one left from Arwad, Syria. Can you see my mouse? Nod your heads if you can see my mouse moving around. You can. Okay. So they left from an island called Arwad. That's where the ship was built. And then it sailed south to the Suez Canal. Obviously, the Suez wasn't there, in 600 BC, but it allowed them to come in and enter in the Red Sea and sail down here. And their plan was, see this blue line, this was their original route that they had scheduled to follow. But if you remember back in 2008, even today, I think there's still some talk about the Somali pirates. Remember the Somali pirates? Well, they were very problematic back in the '08 timeframe. And so they wanted to avoid, this ship would have been a gem for the Somali pirates to try to capture and get a ransom for. And so they said, let's avoid that. And so they sailed close along the Arabian Peninsula and to a place called Salalah, Oman. Any of our Book of Mormon students out there will recognize the location of Salalah as being one of probably the two most likely departure locations for Lehi's voyage, either Salalah or another place called Kafur Kafat. And they're within 50 miles of each other. So either way, the winds and the currents are going to behave very much the same from either of those departure locations. Well, it so happened that Philip Beale unknowingly started his journey the same place that Lehi started his journey. So I think it was fortuitous that the Somali pirates were threatening then, because it put them right where we needed him to go. And he, of course, Philip had no at the time understanding of the Book of Mormon narrative or the of the migrations, and this was all just coincidental to him. But anyway, this is the path they actually followed. They came down, they stopped at the Comoros Islands, which it's been interesting. It's been pointed out before that the capital of Comoros, does anybody know the capital city, how you spell that? It's spelled Moroni, Moroni. Just interesting coincidence, let's say. But anyway, as they came down, they got into this region here, and they hit some very, very rough seas. And in fact, what happened was they were being driven forward by the wind, and they were going through the water at 5 or 8 knots. They could see the water rushing past the bow. But on the GPS, he could see that they were literally moving backwards. Why? Because the current was so strong, even the wind pushing them forward at 8 knots was not enough to overcome the current, which was moving at an even faster pace in the opposite direction. Now, what does that sound like? That's right. Sounds like First Nephi chapter 17, 18, where Nephi, his brothers tied him up to the mast of the ship, and the great storm arose. And I imagine this is where they were. And they were driven backwards upon the water for 4 days. As it turns out, the Phoenicia suffered some significant damage. The sail was completely shredded. The mast cracked, and they had to pull into Cape Town for repairs, which they did. And evidently Nephi's ship held up a little better than the Phoenicia, because we don't have any record that they pulled in to make repairs. We don't know. But it seems like they got good weather and then sailed on their way. Well, as you can see, the rest of their journey was scheduled to stop multiple times up the west coast of Africa. But let's take a look and see where they actually went instead. Because of the prevailing currents and the seas, the currents and the winds, they did not get to stop one time up the west coast, okay, as they had planned. They were going to do 4 or 5 stops. And in fact, what happened was they got pushed very, very far to the west, so far to the west, as a matter of fact, that had they continued on their way, in 3 more days, they would have made landfall in Cuba. And so finally, they were able to catch the North Atlantic countercurrent, which there's 2 currents that run kind of like a figure 8 here over in this area. This one goes this way, and like egg beaters. And so finally, when you get above it, then it pushes you back, and they came back into the Mediterranean, and eventually ended up back in Lebanon, Syria is where they ended up. So that's the first voyage that happened. It took almost 2 years, 22 months, I believe. And they went over it was 22,000 miles altogether. And this is some of the detail here. The original plan was that blue line. The actual plan was the yellow. Okay, so now the second expedition, and this is the one we're really here to talk about today, is the one that happened in 2019. And the schedule for it looked like this: Carthage, Tunisia on September 28th, Cadiz, Spain, Morocco, Canary Islands, and then from Canary to Santo Domingo, that was 37 days from here to here. Even though the whole trip took 5 months, that's because there were lengthy stopovers at different places. But if you just put it into days, it was less than, I think it was less than 50 days total travel time. And so this voyage actually almost mirrors the voyage of Columbus. If you throw a bottle in the water right here, in 35 to 40 days, it's going to end up over here near the Gulf of Mexico. That's just the natural current, and that's the natural way things are going to go. Philip said this was the calmest, the easiest part of the entire voyage. And in a minute, I'm going to tell you about the worst part of the voyage. So when I discovered that it was, early on, when I realized that he was going to sail from the Mediterranean to the New World, then that was where I termed it Mulek's voyage. I thought it was a remarkable retracing of that historical event. Now, we talk about Mulek, and one thing that we've learned from Hugh Nibley is that the very name itself means dear little king or dear little prince in the language of the day. And I think that further underscores, my thesis, which is that not only was he a child, I think he was an unborn child. Where did they go? What was happening? I could go into a lot of detail here, but I'm really not going to. You have to find it in my book when it eventually comes out, whenever that is. So how did Mulek escape? I think we've kind of gone over this. It's, the sad story is that Zedekiah, who was the king of Jerusalem, he was only 31, even though he looks much older in this picture. He was only 31, and I imagine his sons would have been younger than the pictures shown in this art. And so it was very likely that he could have had another son, in the womb. And it's very likely he didn't even know about it, right? His wife, I sense that his wife was spirited out of the city before the siege. Either Zedekiah saw it coming, which we know he did know it was coming, and he himself tried to escape with his sons, but they were captured. And I think it's not unreasonable that he would have sent his wife or wives and their entourage away for their safety. Not to mention the fact that the Lord, and I think this is really interesting, if you go back to Genesis 40 or Genesis 22, that's when Jacob is giving the blessings to his 12 sons. You remember he gives us a promise to Judah that the scepter shall never depart from thee. And that's, the Jews understand that to mean that was the the kingly line that would continue from Judah on down through the kings. and Zedekiah was in that line, and he traced his lineage right back to, to that blessing. And so many of the Jewish rabbis and so forth have wondered how it is that the God did not keep his promise and allowed the scepter to depart from that line. But in fact, if you follow this history, the Lord kept his promise. He kept his covenant that he made through his servant Jacob when he took this direct heir to the throne, Mulek, and took him from the old Jerusalem to the new Jerusalem. And there he continued his posterity and continued a line. In fact, it does lend to this idea of the king men, doesn't it? They probably felt like they were the rightful kings and should have that role. And it may well be that in the Book of Mormon, these were the people that rose up and said, no, we're the descendants of Mulek. We have the rightful heir to the throne, and so on. So that goes toward that thesis. I could see that. All right, so we don't have a lot of information in the Book of Mormon about their story, but we do know that they built a city called Zarahemla, and basically they told Mosiah that they had journeyed in the wilderness and were brought by the hand of the Lord across the great waters into the land where Mosiah discovered them, and they had dwelt there from that time forth. So there's lots that we can explore about the wilderness and where that took them and so forth. It most likely was in the south. Anything to the north was not considered wilderness from people in Jerusalem point of view. You had to go south. You had to go into the Sinai. The Sinai was the wilderness. And they could have gone down here. They could have gone even further south because it's interesting that this territory was controlled by Phoenicians, and there were and the Jews had many dealings with Jerusalem. I mean, with the Phoenicians. You remember it was the ones that built Solomon's temple were essentially Phoenicians, okay, that were called upon because they were the craftsmen and they had all these skills, and they were called upon to build the Solomon's temple. And so they had a great deal of trade with the Phoenicians, and they had agreements with them, and it's likely they would have been protected by them. They could have been shuttled here on ship and then carried overland to a place called Elephantine, which they had garrisons there. The Jews had garrisons there as well as the Phoenicians, and they could have come down the river from there and caught a ship going out of the Mediterranean. Again, there's a lot of detail behind this that can be supported. In fact, there even is in 2 Kings and in Jeremiah a discussion about Zedekiah's women and how they headed for Egypt to escape the Chaldeans. And so we have this sense that they were brought by the hand of the Lord, which means that it wasn't just random. They clearly were being guided and carried and helped. I believe that at some point, the Phoenician sailors must have been converted to the Lord, or converted or captured the vision of what was going on here for them to be so incredibly supportive of this entourage of the king's wife and her servants. As you see here, it's debatable whether they went up to possibly Ireland. There's a lot of interesting ancient writings about Jeremiah having traveled there during this time, and that could have been the way he did it. Or they could have gone, more directly. They could have come in from the north, or they could have come in from the south. My colleagues and I subscribe to the notion that Zarahemla is in Iowa. And the reason that we've believed that is because of the words of the Doctrine and Covenants 125, verse 3, where it says roughly, opposite the city Nauvoo, thou shalt construct a city, and the name upon the city shall be Zarahemla, named upon it. So that's the voice of the Lord to Joseph Smith, asking him to name the land, which is modern day Montrose, but to name that land opposite the city Nauvoo, which would be across the Sidon River, across the Mississippi River, AKA Sidon River, Zarahemla. Well, then what do we find? When you look at the Book of Mormon, where did Zarahemla sit? Well, it sat on the west side of the River Sidon at a place that could be crossed on foot. And that's super important because if you go the whole length of the Mississippi, there's only 2 places where, up until 1848 at least, you could cross the river on foot, because the average depth of the Mississippi River at Nauvoo is 18 inches. Okay, during the normal season, not flood season, but during the off flood season, 18 inches deep. Well, that's wadable, right? Well, how strategic is that when you have a 1,500 mile long river and there's only one key place where you can be crossed? Don't you want to put your city there? Why? So that you can protect that critical location from incursion of enemies, so that you can cross it, you can defend that spot, and now the rest of your border is protected. So it's a really strategic location for a major city. Well, so how they got there to that location in Montrose, Iowa, it's only speculation at this point, because we just don't know whether they came in the north, although there is some indication that they came to the land Desolation, which would have been near the place where the Jaredites were destroyed. So you could argue that it was up here north near Cumorah. Or you could argue that they came up the Mississippi and stopped when they could go no further because the depth of the water was just too shallow to allow their ship to pass. Now, the ship that I sailed in, the Phoenicia, displaced about 5 feet of water. So it was a very shallow hull ship. Okay. Now that's very advantageous when you're sailing upriver, when you're going close to shore and so forth. Even at 5 feet, we had a few times where we hit bottom. And that's a very, very frightening moment. Let me just tell you, the last thing you want to do in a boat is hit rock or hit ground or hit anything. In a wooden ship or even any hull ship, you just don't want to hit ground. So having that nice, very shallow hull was a great advantage that the Phoenicians had designed into their shipbuilding. All right, so are there evidences of Phoenician culture in the heartland of America? And the answer is yes. These are some stones that have been found in a place called Burroughs Cave, and that's in Illinois. This is obviously a map of the Great Lakes area. And if you look at these inscriptions here, these are absolutely Phoenician characters, okay? So what do scholars think? Well, they look at this and say, well, that's nonsense. You can't have Phoenicians in America, so this is obviously fraudulent. Okay, really? But if you believe the Book of Mormon, it's not obviously fraudulent. It's very much a supporting artifact. Again, some very distinct headdresses that more than likely would be very, very hard for a pioneer in the 1830s or 1840s, even 1860s, to have any kind of access to a library that would have shown this kind of detail for them to make up and to draw these kinds of carvings. And besides, what are the farmers really? Is that what they're all about when you're out farming in the frontier of America in the early 1800s? I don't think you're spending your evenings, carving on stone and then hiding them in mounds around the area in a 50 or 100 mile radius. It doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense when those who argue for fraud really have a tough time, I think, making a case for who or why these would have ever been done. Now look at this. Here's a Phoenician vessel with the brailing lines showing, okay? Again, brailing technology is something that's only been recently discovered and wasn't known about in the 1830s or 1840s. So how did they do this? Again, more of these carvings that are clearly Phoenician in their nature. I think I might have some slides. Yeah, this is while we were in Tunisia. We went to this museum, an outdoor museum of all these artifacts where they brought all these Phoenician ruins, artifacts and pieces together. And we saw, sure enough, ancient Phoenician carvings that date back almost 3,000 years, 2,800 years. Look at that. And you see those same kinds of characters happening right here. So scholars have, declared, yeah, that is Phoenician. How it got here, who knows? So this is in Tunisia and that's in America. All right, more of the same, more of the same. I thought this was interesting that Jack Welch, Book of Mormon scholar and well-known founding farms, wrote in his book that most likely Mulek escaped and had Phoenician help. So that's one observation. Now, I'm going to stop right here and go to an update. Yeah, I'll go to an update on what's happened since this, because I see we're only down to about 10 minutes left. And I want to be able to tell you about the current state of things. Do you have any questions up to this point before we jump to the current update? I can't see if there's any text messages. How do I see those?
There's only a couple messages in the chat,
Okay.
Boyd, and they're in regards to the previous presentation you had and whether or not it's available for them to review. And that would be a question for Robert.
Yeah, I think you can find that. And in fact, it goes on, and it goes on from here through the whole voyage. But I want to take a minute now and just kind of update everybody on where things are today. So I'm going to stop share, and then I'm going to share a different
Boyd,
Yeah.
John Mueller does have his hand raised up. Go ahead,
Okay.
John.
Go ahead, John.
I recall reading about an inscribed tablet that was found in Brazil that was considered to be Phoenician writing in the 1800s or late 1800s, and it was around 1870, if I recall right, and it was considered to be a fraud. But then when it was rediscovered in the archives of the museum where it had been placed many years later, much more recently, they realized that the text was using language, syntax, and words that were unknown at the time the tablet had originally been discovered.
Yeah, John, absolutely. I mean, that is a famous find, actually, and it lends a lot of basically what it said. It was carved in Phoenician, and it said, "We are lost sailors. We are part of a 12-ship fleet, and our ship was cast upon these lonely shores, and we await our salvation and pray the gods that will be saved." And so, yeah, it's a very clear indication that there was Phoenician contact, with the New World, and that was in Brazil, right at the point, where it comes out closest. So a very likely place of contact, just given the natural currents of the seas. And given the length of time, over 1,000 years at the Phoenician, I mean, are you kidding me? 1,000 years sailing the open sea? Of course, they're going to find the New World. There's a lot of evidences to show that. The biggest one that I find really fascinating, and it even predates the Phoenicians, is the discussion about the copper mines in Keweenaw Peninsula up in Lake Superior, where there's a pure vein of copper that comes up out of that island, and it's been mined, and the copper is so pure in this vein that literally they can just, with stone, you can chop off pieces of copper and it's almost pure. It doesn't even need to be smelted, because it's so rich. And this kind of copper is distinct because it has 15% silver in it. And anyway, there's been, geologists have looked at that mine and they see that it's been mined. It's not just sitting there untapped, it's been tapped, and 300 million metric tons. Now do the math on it. 300 million of copper, tons of copper have been taken out of that mine. Nobody knows who, and nobody knows when, and nobody knows where it went. But suddenly you have, showing up about 2000 BC, the Bronze Era. Well, what do you need to make bronze? Well, you have to have copper and you have to have tin. And tin, you don't find it here in the New World, but you find it in England, right, in the UK. And so they had very active, we know that Phoenicians were in the UK because there's lots of evidence of that. And they were mining tin and bringing the tin and the copper into the empires there in the Mesopotamian area. And this is my thesis, that's what drove the Bronze Era, is bringing all that millions of tons of copper on these ships that would, pull right up. I mean, it was perfect. There was an island, they could sail right to it. They could load the ships and they could sail back out. And anyway, that's, it's not hard to imagine that they were able to find evidence for Phoenician and other civilizations in North America doing work. Now, can you see this, my email? Are you able to see that? Am I sharing this now? And I'm looking at the Heartland Research Group, Save the Phoenicia. Can you see that? Okay.
Yes.
So what we're looking at is, about a month ago, I had a conversation with a gentleman named John Lefgren. I know some of you may know John. And in the course of the conversation, I mentioned the Phoenicia. He didn't know that I had been involved in that voyage. And he became super intrigued with that because he's been working on raising funds to study this Zarahemla project. And when he discovered that the Phoenicia was in the process of being dismantled and sent from Fort Lauderdale, Florida, back to the UK by Philip Beale, he said, no, we need that. That ship belongs to us. And I'm like, hey, more power to you. If you can convince Philip to stop. I tried, but I didn't have the kind of money that he needed to get the ship. And so he literally, look, here it is. Here's the ship that I sailed on, being disassembled and taken apart and being put into containers and shipped back to United Kingdom. This is our friend Mike LaFontaine. He lives in Florida, and we sent him down there to go and check on the status of it, the progress. And we found out that the ship was essentially already half disassembled. And this is all that's left. This is the stern, the tail end of the ship, that was still intact, more or less. And we were able to actually negotiate the terms. And I'm proud to say and pleased to say that the go back here, the Heartland Research Group has just completed the purchase of the Phoenicia ship. And so it's now being packed up and it will be transported to Iowa.
Oh.
We think it'll go back to its native home. And there will be a sizable museum built there to house it and for people to come in and see it firsthand. And we even have some designs that have been made for the, let's see here. So there is a campaign that's right now in progress. We're trying to raise the money to pay back the people that put up the funds already to buy her. And so it's going to be built there, and we have some early designs. There's some other talking about in a home for Phoenicia. This is one that was done for another ship in another location. This is kind of an idea of what it would look like using clear span fabric. This is the location where it will be. There's the Mississippi River. Here's what's known as the Zarahemla Temple site. And this land was just recently purchased right here next to the highway, 9 acres. And that was where it'll be housed. So that's kind of the latest update on what's happening with the Phoenicia. And I'll take any questions.
Yes, I of course get to have the first question as host. I'm curious about the extent to which you see African influence in the Americas in the pre-colonial era. I've been reading and found it curious that apparently we have very early cotton and bananas that appear to be originally from Africa showing up in the Americas. And that's well before the European contact. Any insight on that from your vantage point?
Paul, and probably not that I can expand on that. That hasn't been a focus of mine, but I'm learning more every day about this. There is so much. It's really remarkable. But it's kind of like the golden thread. When you grab the correct thread and you start tugging on it, the more you pull, the more interesting things seem to just come out. And I think when you're onto something, when you're onto a truth claim that is valid, then things start to fit into place. The puzzle pieces all start to flow. And, just like the things that John was saying, what you're saying about early, African influence, there are a lot of things like this. Once you kind of tap into something, it seems to elicit lots of other areas of connectivity.
Well, then let me take another angle here, because you mentioned the prophecy of Joseph Smith in March of 1841, noting Zarahemla. But in checking the Joseph Smith papers, there's also a reference to Zarahemla in December of 1840. That would precede by a few months the prophecy, and so I wonder how you deal with that.
Okay. I am not the expert on this, but I have a paper that was put together by Gary Coleman. He researched that in great detail, and what he found, and I don't want to misquote him or anybody on this. So if somebody knows it better who's on this call, please chime in. I think Jonathan knows. I don't know if he's on the call though. But I believe that if you go back and look through church history, there were a lot of places where they've gone back and put Zarahemla in before the revelation. It's crossed out and they wrote it in. And so, in fact, when you find out the original text, you don't see any reference to Zarahemla until after the revelation was given, when you go back to those original documents. So I can pull up that article that was put together, or the research paper that was put together by Gary Coleman. I'd be happy to send it out to the group or to you, Paul, if you'd like to see it. But he does address that very point. And it's remarkable that it turns out there is no reference to Zarahemla prior to the revelation.
I think I see Ed Fonce's hand up.
Yes. Wow. I had always thought that the consensus on the route taken by the Mulekites was up north and down through the waterways and above New York and so forth. But to think that they may have actually come in through the Mississippi River, that would be almost a duplicate of the route taken by Lehigh, wouldn't it?
Well, it was essentially because the currents, once you get into the north, let's see, I think it's called the South Atlantic or the Mid Atlantic Current, which is the same one that Lehigh Nephi would have got into. That's the same one you catch when you leave from the Canary Islands and go south. You catch that same current, and because it runs in a large, clockwise circle.
Right.
Yeah, it would have taken them essentially to the same place. Now, it's most likely, our estimations are that Lehigh Nephi landed somewhere probably in the panhandle area of Florida and then went north from there. We don't have any indication that Lehigh Nephi would have ever, got to the Mississippi River, or they might have gone up it, but the indications are that the earliest Hopewell artifacts, show up in the panhandle area of New York, or not New York, excuse me, of Florida,
Right.
and then go north from there, progressing to more and more recent dates. So the next big city center we've identified is Chattanooga, Tennessee, which would have been the city of Nephi. And probably Lookout Mountain could have been a location for the temple. So there's a lot of speculation around that, but we have certainly ancient artifacts that demonstrate large population centers in those regions, and so we associate those with Book of Mormon cities since they existed at the same times as the Book of Mormon.
So you've adopted the heartland theory of where Nephi landed on this continent rather than landing on the west coast of Central America or Mexico.
Yeah, and primarily, at least for me, the primary driving reason for that is because of the location of Hill Cumorah. I'm absolutely convinced that if you go with all of the prophetic statements with regard to Cumorah, there's only ever been one, and it's always been in New York. So if you cling to that, if you put an exclamation point after that, prophetic verity, you then have to reconcile everything within that context. Say, well, the final battles had to be in Western New York, and there's no way you're going to travel from, Chichen Itza to Cumorah to fight a
Right.
battle. I mean, it's a 4,000-mile trip, and that's just physically, logistically impossible to move men and machinery that far. And for why? What purpose? So,
Right.
so with that kind of a pin in the map, once you put the Cumorah pin in, then you have to work back from there, and everything remarkably, does actually work in that context, especially with Zarahemla being where we've located it. That's a second pin in the map. It's not as firm as the Cumorah pin, but it becomes a relevant pin in the sense that it's located on a river that could be the Sidon that meets all the criteria in that respect. And it's just interesting how if you look at chiasmus of history, the Book of Mormon history, and then church history kind of plays out in reverse.
Yes.
The Book of Mormon history, right? Maybe you're familiar with that, where the place of their destruction is where the record was found, and then the first temple was built near Bountiful, and so we associate Bountiful with Ohio, and then Zarahemla with Nauvoo, and so the church kind of followed in reverse order the Book of Mormon people's culture. So that's a chiasmic view of it. I was just going to show this picture since I think today I've only shown you guys the destructed view.
I always found, not always, since I learned about the Heartland group and their work, I felt much more comfortable with their solution. But I do know that there is controversy over that. That there are still people who believe that Nephi landed somewhere in Central America on the West Coast.
Oh, I would, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think the vast majority of scholars and pundits, et cetera, hold to the Mesoamerican theory. It's the most prevalent. It's been around for a long time. All the artwork, leads us in that direction. Mayan pyramids, volcanoes, jungles, et cetera. But you just don't read about Mayan pyramids. You don't read about jungles. You don't read about volcanoes in the Book of Mormon. And so those have kind of been, overlaid or ascribed to the message. You don't have migrating beasts in Central America. There's no need for migration because the climate doesn't change. There's no seasons down there. I mean, there's a rainy season and so forth, but not seasons like you have in North America, which are very distinct and which cause the need for migrating animals and so forth. So there is a lot of things. I lived 6 years of my life in South America and traveled with my family all over Peru and Ecuador, lived in Ecuador, lived in Uruguay, traveled all over Mexico, saw all the ruins in Guatemala and loved it. Thought that was all Book of Mormon. So I grew up with that. And it wasn't until I was like 47 that I first encountered the Heartland model. And when I did, it completely changed my outlook on things. And I had to do a big reinvention of my whole thought processes, but it's been very satisfying to me in that respect.
Right. I grew up in Iowa, in
Oh.
Lamoni, and I recall when I was in like, I don't know, 7th, 8th grade, they wanted us to write an essay, and I wrote on the ruins of Chichen Itza. Little did I know I could have gone just a few miles east and been in their hamlet. Anyway,
Yeah,
it's quite a change.
it is. It takes time for that to settle in for people. It's not something they're used to, and so yeah.
Okay, I just wanted to be clear that was pretty much settled in your mind.
Yeah.
Okay.
Any other questions?
Well, we're talking about, in the Book of Mormon, large groups of people, Lamanites and Nephites. Is that correct? And talked about earthworks in the Book of Mormon. Could it be that the eastern part of the United States was considered to be Nephite land, and that the lands you're talking about that aren't described in the Book of Mormon belonged to the Lamanites? Is that a possibility?
Well, I mean, you need to look at the Heartland model, and there's a map that goes along with it, but it essentially uses the Ohio River and the Ohio River and the Missouri River as the east-west boundaries between the north and the south.
That would go along with the mound builders or the.
Yeah, I mean, the mound builders, I mean, this is just according to modern archaeologists. They will tell you that they began around 300-400 BC and ended abruptly in 400 AD. I mean, that's not even our dates. That's the archaeologists' dates. And they also ascribe to a previous civilization that lived in a similar region, more northerly and more easterly, called the Adena civilization.
Mm-hmm.
And they map to Jaredite timeframes. And so you have exactly what you would expect to find in a Book of Mormon geographic setting. You have two civilizations, not 17. You don't have the Olmecs, the Mayans and the Aztecs and all the various different tribes, because we've learned in the Book of Mormon, it says, that the knowledge of the promised land is kept from many nations because of many nations would overrun the land. And so the Lord has always preserved, the land of promise. So it stands to reason that you should only find two primary civilizations in those time frames. And that's what you find in North America.
Since you don't read about, the South American ruins and so forth in the Book of Mormon, I'm kind of wondering if that isn't the Lamanite civilization, whereas the mound building eastern part of the United States belong to the Nephite civilization. Is that something that I don't subscribe to that. I think what you find when you look at Guatemala
Guatemala, Gauta.
Mhm.
What you really are finding there is a civilization that is tied to the southeastern Asia. Gautama, the worshippers of Gautama. Guatemala means the whole house of Gautama, and when you look at their architecture using the corbel arches, there's no true arches in any of the Mayan structures. The true arches, come from the old world. The corbel arches come from the Southeast Asia, and clearly that influence of Southeast Asia is what you see in Guatemala. I mean, you can look at pyramids, the snake motif, the stairs, the pyramids. I mean, you see the exact same thing in Southeast Asia.
So where do you think the Lamanites did set up their civilization then? Were they just so wild and warlike that they, were just like Plains Indians, or where did they have their civilization?
South of the Missouri and Ohio rivers. And in the Book of Mormon, Jonathan Neville examines this in his Moroni's America, and I think it's an interesting proposition. He suggests there's a what is it called? A space of wilderness, or a border of wilderness, something like that. Anyway, he associates that with the river, because if you think about, if you're going to have a boundary between any two groups of people that are warring each other, you're not just going to draw a line in the sand and say, don't cross this, right? You're going to have some physical geographic thing that helps separate you. And with rivers the size of Ohio and Missouri, you can keep your enemy, to the south. Remember, the Lamanites were in the south and the Nephites were in the north.
Mhm.
So that the north was north of those rivers, and the south was, the Lamanites had the land southward, which included the land of Nephi, which we associate with the Chattanooga, Tennessee area. So they would always go from Nephi, they'd always go down to Zarahemla. You think, well, wait a minute, that's not down, that's north, right? You got to go north to Illinois. Well, their up and down was always associated with elevation and not with north or south.
So do we see any landmarks or ruins or anything that would ascribe to the Lamanite culture, or were they just not as civilized with their structures and their cities? You can look at all the mound builders, and all their works are on the eastern side of the United States, but is there anything that would demarcate Lamanite civilization, anything that they had built? Any structures, any signs of cities that they would have?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, only during the 200 years of peace after the time of Christ, I mean, there were no Lamanites or Nephites. They were all one people. So, I mean, the Lamanites were certainly involved in the structures that would have been built at that time. So the Lamanites were usually only distinguished as such when they were a warring type people.
Mhm.
And they were never known to be as industrious, or they weren't into farming or building as much as the Nephites were, just according to the Nephite record. So I don't know. I can't pinpoint any that are distinctly Lamanitish. I mean,
Mhm.
certainly so you have 1600 years, after the Book of Mormon, where obviously Lamanites were upon the land, right? And they were in tribes, and they used even to this day, they hold many of these mound sites as sacred sites. I lived in New York for 27 years, in upstate New York, and Onondagan is a hill about 6 miles, maybe 10 miles away from Hill Cumorah. It's called Onondagan. Or Gonondagan, actually, but there's the Onondagas Indians. And Gonondagan is a sacred hill to the Seneca Indians. And they go there for ceremonies every year. They have a big festival and so forth there. And so for hundreds of years, or maybe thousands of years, they've held some of these sites as being sacred and ceremonial, to the Lamanites. And after the wars were over, that genocidal wars that destroyed the Nephites, there was another era that the archaeologists look at as the Mississippian era. That's the one after the Woodland era. The Woodland era would equate to the Nephite heyday or the peak. And then the decline of the Woodland era came in the Mississippian, and that's clearly a Mayan influence. And so the Mayans around 900 AD migrated northward and for 200 years conquered many of the tribes in the southern United States and caused them to build great structures. And you can see that in Cahokia in Illinois. You can see it in some of the structures in Georgia and so forth. And they're earthen mounds, but we don't associate those with the Woodland people or the Hopewell people because they came much later. They were built in around 1000 AD, and they were built by Mayans. And the Native Americans call those people the snake people because of their snake motifs. But after 200 years, they drove them off their lands and sent them packing back to Mexico. And that's their legend, is how it goes. And so, and it also seems to equate to what they're finding on the ground and artifacts and so forth. But this is not my area of expertise, so I don't want to go too far down that path, or I'll end up getting corrected by somebody who knows more than I do.
David DeBarth, you have your hand raised?
You have your hand raised.
Yes, thank you, Boyd. I'm curious, as I read Alma, it appears that the General Moroni and Helaman and his 2,000 sons battled the Lamanites on a pretty continuous basis. There weren't any breaks for winter. Growing up with Ed in southern Iowa, with a moist hand, you can freeze it to a pump handle very well. You could freeze it to a weapon. I can't imagine them fighting that continuous battle, that kind of battle in southern Iowa. How do you react?
You know, you've I'm sure read a lot of early church history, you know, during Joseph Smith and Brigham Young and you know, Parley Pratt's era, and you read their journals. I find it striking that when you read and it says, I'm writing this on February 6th, and then you find out, you know, if you go and look through the almanac or whatever, you look up, it was like 10 below zero on February 6th. He didn't make a single comment about how cold it was. And it was almost like, you know, we're not really going to talk about the weather because it's kind of just what happens. It's so common. Why would I mention weather? I mean, if they lived in a rainforest, you would think they'd talk about rain, but rain's only mentioned once in the entire Book of Mormon. So it seems like weather, for whatever reason, maybe, you know, when Mormon was condensing the record, that just wasn't an important thing to include. I think it's interesting, your observation about them fighting continuously. I didn't get the sense that they fought throughout an entire 365-day period. That would be surprising to me. Generally, wars are always fought seasonally, and you know, in the seasons thereof is when they would fight the wars, and then there's seasons that you just don't fight in. Even though Washington survived Valley Forge, and he did cross the Delaware on Christmas Eve, which was a surprise because nobody did that, right, in warring times. But I think it's a bit of a mystery to me, David. I'm not going to say I know the answer to that. I just want to say that when you put 22 pieces of the puzzle together and 12 of them don't fit, you don't necessarily throw apart the other 22. You continue to look for ways to fit the other 12. And I think I'm down to just 2 or 3 puzzle pieces that don't fit. And maybe you've suggested one of those, and it's just kind of remains a mystery to me, but I don't really have a big answer for that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And Esther had put a couple remarks in the chat box saying Mayan structures were built 800 to 1200 AD, long after the Book of Mormon ended. And the Lamanites lived in the wilderness and dwelt in tents as opposed to structures. So thank you for sharing that, Esther.
I think that's consistent with what I just said, isn't it? I mean, she's not saying something different, is she?
I don't believe so.
That was Bruce, not Esther. That's my wife.
Oh, sorry. Says Esther on my screen and you were darked out.
Esther's logged in.
I think that's my point, is that, they were more nomadic. and-
Nomadic, yeah. Yeah, I mean, they lived in tents, and so, they didn't do a lot of buildings with even the Book of Mormon people, even the Nephite people, we don't read about them building with stone. The only time stone structures are mentioned is they were hastily cast up at one point, as a defense. And then they used cement at other times when they didn't have what? Wood. When they didn't have wood, they used cement. So what did they build with? Wood, right? Which is why you don't find many of their houses standing these days. I mean, if you build a cabin in the woods, it's not going to last for 1,000 years, right? It's not going to last 100 years. So that's why we don't find any of their wooden structures, but we do find post molds, around these fortifications where you can see where they had wooden structures that rose up out of these, ditch embankment type of structures with post molds left behind that showed where the old posts were stuck in. So we do have lots of evidence for that.
Boyd. Paul has his hand raised and then Wanda. Go ahead, Paul.
Well, my wife raises a question that I want to pass on about Hagoth.
And Corianton, Hagar.
Yeah, Hagoth and Corianton. And then, but while you're thinking about that, the cement idea is something that's nicely illustrated at Teotihuacan in Mexico, but I don't recall any places in the Heartland area that have a city of cement. Have one?
There, cement doesn't last a long time with the freezing and thawing seasonal patterns, and so you won't have a lot. But there is actually evidence of later period cement on these fort type structures that the Native Americans erected, and they would cover their wooden structures with cement, actually with a kind of like a stucco, and that would prevent their enemies from being able to light them on fire to burn their fortress walls down. So there is indications in later eras, in the 1700s and so forth, where they were using a form of cement. But I don't think there's been any cement. There is something called, in the mounds, they're actually engineered mounds, and they have layers of clay and gravel, and then something called Hopewell cement, that's allowed these structures to stay in, uneroded and in place for so long. I don't know if that kind of cement equates to what they were talking about or not, but again, I'm not the expert on that. Wayne May would be.
Take the Hagoth question, and if you would, please. Hagoth sailed north and
Corianton.
Corianton. My wife is Tahitian, and so she would like to have you make the connection for her.
I'm just going to go with what Wayne May has suggested, and that is that the north of if you go north of Zarahemla, you're going to go right into Lake Michigan, and you can certainly go north from there. Now, there is indications geologically that there were ways to sail directly out to the sea, in bygone eras from the Great Lakes. And so that would argue for that type of approach. He could have gone out to the ocean through the St. Lawrence and possibly out through, the famed Northwest Passage, which has never been found, but is, mythological. And maybe it did exist in some ancient time.
Getting close to bedtime, isn't it?
Yeah, anytime you're ready.
What?
Getting kind of late.
What'd you say?
It's Wanda's turn.
Yes, I would like to ask what you think of the scripture in Alma, where he talks about there were many fevers, but the Lord had provided plants that they could use to cure them, so they didn't suffer so much from them.
Oh, well, you know, that's,
You would think about a warm climate for that. Very warm.
well, I mean, a season implies that you have seasons. That's significant right there. And as far as herbs and medicines, I mentioned earlier, or I showed a picture of, in fact, it might come up here momentarily. A picture of Mike LaFontaine and his wife Betty. Okay, I guess we're done with that. And Betty and Mike are involved in some of this research, and they have found this plant that has amazing medicinal properties. And I can't think of the name of it right now. Does anybody online remember what they're finding? But it's something
Bee
that's,
balm,
say again?
spotted
bee balm, Anarta punctata.
That's it. Spotted bee balm. They've done a lot of research. In fact, I bought some from them at a show a couple of months ago that they had. And it has tremendous medicinal properties. And that's, you know, all over the Midwest where that's found. So I guess that's my comment to that, Wanda.
Okay.
Is everybody able to stay awake? I don't want to put everyone to sleep. It's been a long
Wide
one.
awake.
According to the speaker we had a few weeks ago, that bee bomb's only found in 3 places in the United States.
Oh,
Florida and Iowa, and I forgot where the other place was at.
well, I'm going to go with that, Marlene, because I didn't hear that speech. So I'll go with your information. Sounds more accurate than mine.
Whoever gave us the talk that told us all about the bee bomb was the individual that told us that. But gosh, I don't remember who it was. Sorry, my memories.
He called himself Opie
Opie. Oh,
because he looked like Opie in the.
That was
Griffith
Kevin
show.
Price.
oh yeah, Kevin
Okay.
Price. Yeah.
Right.
And the spotted bee balm grows all over the eastern United States and southern Canada.
Okay.
But there's 9 different varieties. The Iowa version is the most medicinal.
There you go. There you go. See, this group is filled with fountain of knowledge here. Well, I sure enjoyed, you know, visiting with you folks today, and I'm excited about some of the things that have happened here. I appreciate this forum where we can share these different ideas. And I had an amazing expedition, amazing experience. I wasn't on the voyage for the entire trip. I was on it for about 1,200 miles as we went through the Mediterranean and into Spain. But it was a tremendous learning experience, and I'm really thrilled that we're going to be able to reassemble that boat and put it up in a museum here in what we like to call Zarahemla, and just see where that goes. It's going to be remarkable to see how that develops.
We
So
do
thanks,
have a
folks.
couple more questions, Boyd, if you've got the time.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, Ed, you're first, and then Paul.
I'm interested in a brief description, if you can, of what it was like sailing on that Phoenician boat.
Yeah. Let me take you there a little bit here. I've got whoops. I've got some.
You did mention you were going to tell us about a storm you were in. I was just
Yeah,
curious.
I just looked at the time though and thought, oh my goodness, I can't take too long, but I can take you through that if we have a minute here. Let me see if I can get to that place. It was, I like to call it the let's see if I can get to it. All right, let me go to screen share for a second here. Is this right? Yeah. No. Okay, you seeing my screen now?
No, not yet.
Oh, you're right. I didn't click share. Okay, there. That,
Two.
oh,
There it
that's, yeah, that's the wrong one. Try again. There we go. Okay, so so that's the ship that I sailed on. That's my first day that I saw it, and it's a remarkable vessel. I'll just tell you, it was amazing. This was the galley, and we spent a lot of days there. This is under the main deck, the foredeck. This is where we slept. You can see there's a hammock stretched across there. Someone's asleep in it. And that's where we'd 6 at a time, we'd be asleep down here while the other 6 are at the controls, at the helm, and so forth, at cooking. And so that was how we sailed every day. What I've got here are some pictures of some ancient replicas of what ancient Carthage used to look like. They were very advanced, remarkably advanced. They were not a primitive people, these Phoenicians. It's my wife came to visit me during that week that I was there. We learned a lot about the purple dye, which is what made the Phoenicians so incredibly wealthy. A ship like ours, if the hull were filled with this purple dye, would be worth $50 million in our money. That's how valuable and they had ships the size of ours as a merchant vessel carrying purple dye. It was incredible. Made them super wealthy. This is what governed our life every day. We had 6 hours on and 6 hours off. I was on the A team, and we had a B team. And so each of us would take our time. So if I started at this hour, or we started at 8 o'clock at night, and then I would be on cooking, and then I would go to cleaning, and then to fill in, and then to the helm. That means you're at the rudder. And then I would do check, which is you're checking all of the lines, the sail, all of the rigging, make sure everything's good. And then lookout was to stand up at the front and watch for passing ships. And mainly we were always looking out for freighters, which travel about 20 knots, and they're very, very dangerous if we get in their path. And so we were always being on the lookout, especially at night. You could only see lights at night, so it was tricky. But
Wow.
so this was okay. So you asked, what was it like to be on board ship? And this was classic moment. We're obviously traveling west. This is sunset. The sail is full. The ship's moving forward at about 4.5 to 5 knots. And it is just the most incredible feeling to see that sail full of wind and sailing, with the wind the way we did. And you just make, we do about, at the rate we're going, about 100 miles a day. And so it's just a beautiful way to travel. And it's pretty amazing. This was life on board ship. Everything was in salt water. We had on board fresh water, but that was only for drinking because we had to preserve it, of course. So washing our clothes, doing the dishes, it was all in salt water. We just throw this bucket over the side. Whoops. We throw this bucket over the side with a rope tied to it, and we'd pull up a bucket of water and fill up our pans and so forth to wash our clothes, wash our dishes. This was our latrine, our onboard services. Wasn't quite as nice as this little vessel over here. It's a $3 million yacht, and we had a $3 million wooden Phoenician boat. But this is, we did have an onboard GPS and tracking system that's required by law. And also it's important for us to be able to see other ships in crossing our path. That's an example of a freighter that we never wanted to get in front of. We would have been broken up like a popsicle stick and shattered into 1,000 pieces if we got hit by one of those. our ship would probably be about as long as the letter A compared to the size of this thing. Right there. That would have been the length of our entire ship was the letter A. So that's the path we followed. This is the little episode that I call the Jonah and the whale episode. You notice this is the only time during the entire voyage where we didn't make forward progress. If you look at the whole ship, it's always making forward progress to the west, to the west. We never went backwards except for right here. And I call it Jonah and the whale episode. And we had some very high seas. From a distance, we could see these clouds and just lightning striking. And it was like that scene from Narnia, from the voyage of the Dawn Treader going into the jaws of hell, it looked like to me. And I'm just like, Captain Beale, do we really have to go that way? He says, look, this is where we go. It's where the wind takes us. And so we're in 15-foot seas, which doesn't sound that big, but when you're at the bottom of that, it's deep and high, and where the top of it, it's crazy. We were being thrown side to side, roundabout, and we had to deploy what's called a sea anchor, which is essentially a small sail that we had tied on all four corners, and then we deployed it out the front of the boat because we were being driven backwards against the direction that we wanted to go, but we had to keep the ship into the wind. And so the way you do that is you deploy a sea anchor, which is a sail, and it was about a 10-foot by 10-foot sail, and it goes out into the water, goes down 20 or 30 feet, and then it acts like a parachute that keeps the bow of the ship into the wind. And that's when we were being driven backwards, but we were always facing west into the wind. And so it brought up to mind, I said, well, what did Jonah experience when where was Jonah? How did that, we read about these stories in the Bible, and where did that actually happen? And how did it happen? And what kind of ship did Jonah sail in? Well, lo and behold, I Googled it. I said, what kind of ship did Jonah sail? And this is the screenshot. It says a Phoenician ship, similar to the type Jonah boarded. I thought, holy crap, that's what we did. And that's what we were in. And here we are sailing in the middle of a huge storm. And I'm thinking, this is crazy. It established for me authenticity for the Bible and the Book of Mormon. And the Lord commands Jonah to go to cry repentance. Well, what's Nineveh? Well, it's Mosul, Iraq. And then he said, no, he was in Jaffa at the time, which is on the coast of Israel. And so what did he do? He said, I'm not going to Nineveh. Instead, I'm going to get on boat. He paid to board a ship, and it was a Phoenician ship. And it was about 755 BC, so 150 years older than the ship I was on. And he sailed to Tarshish. And where is Tarshish? Well, there is such a place. It's called Cadiz, Spain. We actually stopped there on our voyage. So all of this just became real to me as we experienced this Jonah's journey, right? Which is, again, from where he was that was a 2,500 mile journey he was on, and somewhere in the middle of there, he got tossed overboard. So this is how it feels. There's this wonderful book we had on board called Expedition Wilderness Medicine. And halfway through the book, it talks about seasickness or mal de mar. And first you feel sick, then you say, I think I'm going to die. And then the third stage is, I'm worried I'm not going to die. And so I went through all three of those stages, needless to say, during that storm. It was a toughie. We did suffer some damage from that experience, and we had to limp into Algeria, which is a closed nation. They don't allow outsiders to come in. And so the Algerian Coast Guard came and met us, and on their bullhorn, they said, we escort you. And so they kind of helped us get into their, these were some of the crew members that we sailed with. There's two other Americans, and all the rest were other international. This was coming into the port of Algiers. It's an amazing city. It's frozen in 1963. That's when they kicked the French out, and nothing has been built since. And so it's just frozen in time. And well, it's a whole nother story, and getting out of there and all the stuff we went through, and getting out of the customs and having to pay them all off, and so on and so forth. Anyway, that's my little story of the onboard trip. And one thing that does come out in Philip Beale's book is coming out here in the next month or two. And I actually contributed a small chapter to that book, and it talks about this episode where the waves were so high, and it was my turn to go back to the helm and take the helm, and I was on my way to the back, and it's only about a 4-foot wide along the side of the galley on one side, and then there's a safety rope that you hold on to, and then on the left side is, you know, the railing, which hits you right about the knee. Well, what happened is I was walking back there, I had my life jacket on, and I was struggling, and the ship shifted suddenly, and I missed my handhold on the side of the galley, my handhold on the rope, and the ship shifted to the right, and the railing caught me at the knee and started to throw me over the side. And I willed myself to get my center of gravity low as fast as I could. And as I was traveling down, I landed on the railing and sat there and teetered like this on the railing for probably 2 or 3 seconds. It felt like an eternity. And finally the ship righted herself, and I fell back in on board onto the deck. And I lay there for a while thinking about it, and then managed to get myself back to the helm, and in the middle of that raging rainstorm and lightning and everything, continue to guide the ship. But I wrote about that episode, and it's in his book, and he captured it in there, and it's quite fascinating. And the title of the episode is "The Voyage That Almost Wasn't." And in it, I talk about the consequences of what would have happened had I gone overboard right there in the middle of that storm. And the consequences were that 99% chance I would not have made it, right? Because when you go over in a storm, you're traveling at about 3 to 5 knots away from the ship, and that's about 8 feet a second. And so within a minute or two, you're out of sight of anybody. And at dark at night, they wouldn't have been able to turn the ship around. They would have had to bring in the sea anchor and all the things as you process it, you realize, and the water is warm, but it's not that warm. Okay. So hypothermia eventually does take over. You're in the water for 4 to 6 hours trying to be rescued. You'll be dead. And so there was a lot of concerns that went through my mind, and how close it came to causing a lot of trouble. I felt really responsible almost for ending that expedition in a very negative way, but it was, fortunately it didn't happen. And so it's just kind of a moment of contemplation about the possible consequences of unexpected actions. So that's my little story.
I take it you didn't see any whale-sized fish around?
Oh, yes, we did. We saw lots of whale-sized fish.
No, I mean during that storm.
No, not during the storm. We didn't get any whale-sized fish coming up, but we did. This is kind of a example of what it was like to actually sail in the wind.
That's a memory that could almost lead to PTSD.
I think this was the morning after the big storm, or it might have been 2 mornings after. I'm not sure.
A welcome sight.
Boyd, why the horse's head on the bow?
Sorry.
Why was there a horse's head on the bow of your Phoenicia?
Oh yeah, horse's head was very typical for these ancient Phoenician ships, and we see that in a lot of these paintings of on these Greek urns and so forth. That's a common design feature on the Phoenician ship. So we adopted that, or Philip Beale adopted that in the original design too.
Had you had any experience sailing on sailing ships prior to this experience?
You know, I have not. The only sailing experience I had prior to this was, you know, I have a windsurfer and I go out and windsurf on lakes and so forth, but no open sea sailing at all. So that wasn't something I experienced. But one day we were becalmed and we were just kind of sitting there waiting for the wind. And while we were there, we were visited by a whole pod of pilot whales.
Oh, yes.
Neat.
So they were just fascinated by the ship. And so we actually donned our swimming trunks and hopped in with them, thinking that we could, you know, go over and pet them or something, but they wouldn't let us get near them. They would always stay about 40 or 50 feet away from us, no matter how we tried to get near them. Yeah, there's the horse head right there. And it is the symbol of the Phoenician ships, very common.
We're not seeing the horse head, I don't think.
Right there. You see that?
Oh, there it is. Yeah,
Hello.
yeah, now we can.
Mhm.
David has a question. Go ahead, David.
More of a comment, thank you. It's more of a comment about ocean currents. The equatorial currents across the Atlantic would take you from the Mediterranean area east to west. The ocean currents in the Pacific would take you the same way. So there was a fisherman from Mexico that got out off the west coast of Mexico. His motor totally died and he was stranded. I think the title of the book is 436 Days, because after 436 days, he ended up in the Marshall Islands. There's no way that a ship of that type could sail from the west to the east and land in Mesoamerica on the west coast of Mesoamerica. Coming from the west to the east, you would either end up down in South America, way down, following the Arctic currents, or way up north and ending up down somewhere like Washington or Oregon. So as you think about how the Aboriginal peoples landed in America, those who came by boat, I think you're pretty limited to the number of paths that they could take.
Yeah, that's a good observation, David. I as I've come to learn this, I mean, the most logical path for both Lehi, Nephi, and Mulek would have been the paths that we've identified by virtue of this ship's expeditions. Its 2 expeditions, I think, have virtually retraced those paths and shown not only the feasibility, but shown the timeframes involved, which are very doable. I mean, you're only talking, you know, land to land, a maximum of 37 days from Canary Islands to, you know, from Mulek. And we know that the Phoenicians were active on the Canary Islands. In fact, there's carvings that have recently been excavated on Canary Island that have all of the consonants for the word Zarahemla. And that's been a really intriguing thing. Does that mean Zarahemla? Well, we don't know, but it's interesting that we're finding in the Canary Islands a reference that very much has the same phonetic sounds as the Zarahemla from the Book of Mormon. And so, but yeah, Phoenicians were very active in the Canary Islands, which is where we sailed from. In fact, this is the picture you see here is on the way to Canary Islands. Here's Tenerife at the Canary Marina. And then this is leaving that, although this is a postcard picture. That's not our ship. But we left on November 24th. And this is from this point until, touchdown in Santo Domingo, Dominican Republic, it was just open ocean across the Atlantic, 37 days from here to here. So, and then the other voyage, Lehi Nephi, obviously a much longer voyage, but still within the reasonable times of, you can carry that much water for about, I think about 32 to 35 people on board the ship that Nephi built. You can carry water for that. Plus you get rain. Plus you can fish. We caught fish, as we were traveling. And I imagine they probably had, the means to catch fish. And you can carry a lot of food and fruit and vegetable like they did. They carried lots of, all their seeds and so forth that they had harvested. So it's not such timeframes that it's impossible to make this kind of journey. That's what we've been able to demonstrate through this voyages.
Frank has his hand up. Go ahead, Frank.
Yes, thank you. I just wanted to make a comment that there is a counter-equatorial current that goes eastward across the Pacific, and Nephi and Lehi had brought the Lahona with them, and they relied on that explicitly during their entire trip. And when they couldn't rely on it, they wound up going backwards. And another thing is, we're not sure how long it took the Nephites to cross the ocean. They never say, but it says after many days. So,
yeah, look, I'm not here to argue for or against a particular. Well, I guess I am kind of, but I'm not going to
sure.
Try to counter that. I mean, that's a legitimate thing. I've heard, certainly I'm familiar with it and I've studied it in great detail, that there are ways to do it. I know that, some scholars have suggested that while a ship could make the voyage, one of the biggest challenges would have been to stay alive on that lengthy of a voyage, just because of the lack of the need for protein for 35 people is quite high. And the amount that you'd have to carry to make that long of a voyage, when you have, especially when you think they left from Arabia, okay, in the fall of the year, and the prevailing currents only go down the east coast of Africa from like August, September, October, November. The prevailing thing only pushes you south. So really, there was an effort by another expedition to go east from Arabia, and I think it was called the Jewel of Arabia, Jewel of Muscat was the ship, and it failed in that effort, so much so that it had to be towed back to wherever it had tried to make that east voyage from Arabia, and it foundered and couldn't make it. So for what it's worth, it's if you're going to go with the prevailing currents, the Lord can reverse the currents of the world and cause it to spin another direction if he wanted to, or you can just go with the natural currents as they are. The Lord uses means to bring people where he needs them, and the natural currents would have taken you right around the Cape of Africa and into the Gulf of Mexico, which frankly you can end up in Honduras, Nicaragua, Costa Rica, Guatemala, wherever you want. I mean, there's nothing that says you have to go north from here, right? They could have gone over there. That's what Jack Welch maintains, that they came in here, that Mulek did, right? The only reason we say the west coast of here is because of some writings of some of the early brethren, not Joseph Smith, but some of the others suggested that's where they came into. And so, if you want to go with their testimony, that's fine. I'm just going with what the actual results of the voyage were.
Bruce? Was it Bruce? You're muted.
Yeah, I wasn't
It should
asking
be-
anything.
It should be noted that Philip Beale's first voyage was from Indonesia around the tip of Africa, westbound up to Ghana. So he has a lot of experience sailing.
Yeah, that's a good observation, Bruce. This wasn't his first rodeo. He knows what he's doing. And for him, it was super important that the ship be authentic. And so we actually have part of the negotiation in purchasing the ship for the Heartland Research Group was the verification from the marine archaeologists who observed the construction and compared it to the original Jules Verne 7. We have a document from them that confirms its authenticity, that it's not like a cheap knockoff. It's not like a revised, updated version. It's an exact replica of that. And we have that document. That's going to be featured highly in the museum, of course, because it's so important. If you're not using an authentic replica, then it's not really a true expedition of a ancient maritime voyage. But where this ship, okay, yeah, we had some modern conveniences like a gas stove, but they actually had on the originals a brick oven inside those ships. So they would cook their food right there on board using wood. They would burn wood in their little brick ovens in there. And so they had a stove on board. We had gas, that was made nice. We also had a solar panel, to charge our devices and so forth. But generally the ship itself, the construction, the navigating, the guiding, the steering, the sailing, the sail, the brailing lines, all of that is an exact replica of what was done anciently, and that's what's important. So.
Roger, you have your hand up. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, Boyd, thanks for that great presentation. A couple of things on Mulek. One, I've noticed, and since you showed that slide saying the form of the word, how it means Prince King or something of that nature, but you use Mulek and Melek. And I've noticed that my versions of Book of Mormon seem to have some controversy themselves on whether it's Mulek or Melek or land of Melek and person of Mulek or what have you. I wonder if you had a comment on that. And secondly, you had your theory on him being an unborn child. That's the first time I've ever heard that, and that's very intriguing. I don't know if you got any more on that, but that's something that's it's kind of a mind-blowing option that was never considered in my head.
Yeah, me too. Well, first of all, the Mulek Melek, I would just refer you to the article that Hugh Nibley wrote about that. He does reference both forms of the name. I don't have any further information on that. As far as the unborn prospect of the Prince of Judah, or the Prince of son of King Zedekiah, I did some research on the Babylonians and how one of the key things that Nebuchadnezzar did when he conquered other nations and other kingdoms was make sure that he got rid of any potential claim to the throne. And so this wasn't a first rodeo for him. When he got to Jerusalem, he knew the routine, and they knew the routine. And it was, you take the king, you take all of the heir apparents, and you make sure that they are all killed, and not privately. It has to be very public. So in a very public way, you slay all the heir apparents. And then what happened, interestingly, so Zedekiah was bound and forced to watch each of his sons be killed. And then his eyes were put out, so that the last thing he ever witnessed was the destruction of his kingdom. There was no heirs for him. Now, think about it. If Mulek had been born, he is a potential heir to the throne. He's the son of the king, right? You think that's going to go unnoticed by the newspaper of the day or the media? You think they're just going to say, oh, this never happened? Or is it going to be a major event? It's going to be announced. It's going to be broadcast. It's going to be heralded as important thing because he is a potential heir to the throne. So that's going to be a matter of record. And how long will it take Nebuchadnezzar and his henchmen to quickly discover that, right?
Sure,
so,
everybody would know it. No doubt about it. And
yeah. So if that child had been born, there's no question they would have tracked him down and taken him out, just like they did the others, because that represents the single biggest threat to Nebuchadnezzar's control over that land, that kingdom. And so they never allowed an heir apparent to, just go on with his daily life. That wasn't going to happen. So that's when I started thinking about it. Then how did Mulek get away? And there's really only two explanations. One, his mother was spirited out of the city so fast and so far that their searches could not find this child king or child prince Mulek, which I just can't believe. They would have had resources to track him down wherever they were, and they would have found him. Or they could have been protected by the Lord and he got away. Or more likely, and this is the one I've concluded, no one knew that he was. And that to me is kind of the economy of God. Why was Jesus born in a stable? Why was it only known to the shepherds? Why, are these things the way they are in the Lord's economy? And you just look for the almost irony, and that's when you find that's the way the Lord operates. And so he takes someone with zero awareness that there goes the king of, Judah inside his mother's womb, out of the city and on her way. And they don't bother to chase her down because she represents no threat as far as the kingdom is concerned, because nobody knows. And I even suggest that with the torture techniques they had, probably even King Zedekiah did not know, or they probably would have gotten that out of him eventually too. So I think it was an unknown thing that was only known by his mother and her entourage. And that's how they got away. And that's how they got to the promised land. And the Lord kept his covenant that he had made with Judah, that the scepter would always remain with that line, and that it carried on in the New Jerusalem.
It's a great theory. I appreciate it. It's always been a hole in my my picture of how does a prince get away? How does any of the kids get away? It's like, oh yeah, he got away somehow. But that's an excellent theory. And what was the name of the guy that you said did the work on that? Because I'm not as familiar with him as you are, obviously.
Yeah, just Google the name of Hugh Nibley, Hughnibley, and
Okay.
His research on Mulek, and I think it'll come up.
Thank you.
You bet. You bet.
Okay, Marlene and then Frank. Go ahead, Marlene.
You were talking about you had a gas stove. I'm interested in this cooking thing because if I'd have been on the ship, I would just want to have been a full-time cook and forget about the steering. But did you have a gas refrigerator and any kind of way of freezer or anything like that?
No, that was the thing we missed most was ice cream. All we talked about all day long was ice cream. Our different flavors, our favorite toppings. We went on and on, about all of our favorite frozen treats. There was nothing cold on board the ship at all. And so we had eggs, we had, vegetables, we had carrots and onions, and lots of things like that. Potatoes, they keep for a long time down in the hull. We didn't have any trouble keeping those. Bread didn't last too long. Canned goods we kept on board, of course, and ate a lot of canned goods. But the cooking on board, we would have loved to have you, Marlene. You would have been fantastic. I wish you'd have been there.
Yeah, you could have made your own bread, really. Flour, yeast, and like that. That would have been real easy.
We should have had you with us, Marlene. We did bake a couple of cakes, actually, because there were a couple of birthdays, while we were out. So we had cake. But to say that the food was fantastic would be a bit of an overstatement. I mean, it kind of depended who was on duty. When the Indonesians were on, it was going to be so spicy and so hot, you knew that you were going to be tasting it for hours. And so it kind of we went through a cultural, it was a cultural experience every day, depending on who was on cooking. So, yeah.
So did you have powdered milk?
We actually had shelf milk. And you've probably seen this before. It's milk that you can just sit on the shelf at room temperature and it stays. So that's what we'd pour that on our cereal in the morning. And yeah, we went through a lot of that. It's not, certainly not my favorite kind of milk, but it served.
When you're hungry, you'll eat anything.
Well, what was the best was when we caught fish. When we caught fresh fish and put that on the fry pan, oh my goodness. That was a delicacy we all relished.
Well, if you had cornbread mix and some of your milk and egg, well, you could add cornbread.
Yeah. Yeah. Wish you'd have been there, Marlene.
That's always good with fish, or I think it is anyway.
I made a few Japanese dishes that I learned while I was on my mission, but you know that they enjoyed that quite a bit. All right. Any other questions?
Frank has his hand up.
All right, Frank.
Yeah, just wanted to mention, I agree with you on the idea of the where Mulek escaped, probably because he was not born yet. The fact that Jeremiah was given charge of all of the king's women, because Jeremiah was friends with the king of Babylon. He'd prophesied against the king there, who is one of his relatives, by the way. And because of that, the King Nebuchadnezzar was favorable toward Jeremiah,
Right.
and he treated him like he was, on his side, and so he gave him charge of all the women. And I believe it was with Jeremiah that he got away, that the mother got away with the baby.
That's interesting because David Doan, who I've worked with, collaborated somewhat on my book. He holds that same view, and he's done a lot more research than I've done on the Mulekites, and that's exactly what he's proposing. That's why he had Jeremiah going up to Ireland, which what the old mythology holds.
That's a very probable route too. Yeah. And of course, the tradition is that Jeremiah married one of the daughters of King Zedekiah to Haramon, the king up there, who was a member of the would have been the Zerah group of Judah that had migrated there much earlier, and that healed the breach between the Pharez and the Zerah groups of Judah. And if they were ruling Ireland there wouldn't have been much room for Mulek as a young son to do anything up there. And besides, the Lord had another purpose for him anyway. And somehow the Lord figured out how to get him over. I'm sure that Jeremiah was the one that probably arranged that. He probably used Phoenician shipping to get him over there too, to the New World.
Yeah, no, I think that's very, very, very valid train of thought. I do. That's where the ancient royalty draws their lines from. Modern royalty goes back through that line.
Right.
Yeah, I think that totally is.
By the way, I lived in Oaxaca, Mexico for many, many years. And there is down on the Pacific coast, there's a seashell sea creature that produces this Tyrian purple. And that has been, there you go. That, along with several other things, indicate that the Phoenicians were probably related or associated with this group that came over. And by the way, there is one of the Mayan groups, the lowland Maya, the Chontal Maya, are called by some of the writers about the Maya, they call them the Phoenicians of the New World. And they were the only ones that knew about this kind of Tyrian purple.
Interesting. I was not familiar with that. That's fascinating. Yeah, it's remarkable. So I've raised a few questions that I presented this to some of the scholars at BYU, and my question was, is anyone ever going to take up the lessons learned from this expedition and treat it And there's been a resounding silence. And so we'll see where it goes. But
That usually happens.
We have a question in the chat. Boyd, Aspie's wondering under which flag did the ship sail legally by legal law on board? It's is determined in international waters by the flag of the ship. So what flag did they fly under?
Tell you what, I'll show you. That's the actual flag right there.
Oh, wow.
This made the whole 5,000-mile voyage, and you can tell it's well worn and somewhat tattered and shredded.
Yeah.
But it was under the British flag.
You have a picture of it up?
Do I have a picture of it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I-
can send a picture.
It's not
Ed, he was
showing.
showing it in your, if you go to your view and so you can see the galley side by side, you'll see what he's showing on the screen. Boyd, when you have your slides up, you can't see what you showed on the side of there
Mhm.
with your camera.
Oh,
So apparently
you can't-
Ed didn't see the
oh, you're
flag.
not seeing this right now? You can't see my,
You
Oh,
see it,
there
Ed?
is.
Apparently- Okay, now he saw it.
Yeah, I see it. Oh, wow. It is looking weathered.
yeah. Yeah. Yeah, Philip gave me that. That was a real treasure.
Yeah.
So I ended up with the flag and the compass that we used on board, which is right behind where I'm standing right here. Actually, I guess it might be in this black box here was the compass that we used. So when you were sitting at the helm, you basically sit on this board right here and you run the rudder. We could steer it with one rudder. It has two, it had another rudder, but we would just keep that one stationary. We had it tied off with a rope and it would stay stationary. And we did all the steering with the one rudder. Only in high seas, when it was really rough, did we need to use two rudders.
Monty has a question. Go ahead, Monty.
Yeah, when I heard about two rudders, I thought you might have them hooked in tandem or something like that, but I hear what you're saying now. What I was wanting to know is, this may sound like a dumb question, but chronologically in the Book of Mormon, what period of time were the Mulekites discovered?
Okay, yeah, they were discovered. We don't know the exact date, but it was between 300 and 400 years after they arrived. So that would be about 300 BC. So you imagine, they had 300 years plus years to build up their city, to establish their population. So it was quite a population center, by the time Mosiah and his people discovered them.
I think
And
it
they
was
had already-
closer to 400 years after, which would have
Yeah.
been about 200 BC.
Yeah, it was closer to 400, somewhere between 370 and 400 or 400.
Right.
So
Thank you.
yeah, that was, I'm showing a picture here. These are called the Brailing lines. I've referenced them several times. This was when you gather these Brailing lines up, what it does is it grabs the bottom of the sail and it pulls it up. Each individual rope grabs a different section of the sail. They're about 3 or 4 feet apart, and they will pull the whole sail up until it's tight around the yard arm. And that way you can quickly, furl or unfurl the sail in as weather conditions require. If you get really strong winds, you've got to pull that sail up, and it was much easier than trying to lower the yard arm or to lower the sail. It was just easy to just draw in these lines, and that whole sail would just come up like a curtain in front of a movie theater. And it was really clever technology, and that was totally replicated in this ship. When we came into Miami, we had quite a arrival scene. We had the, what do you call it? The fire boat right in front of this little boat. They were shooting their, we went all along the city front with these spouts shooting up in the air, and had a lot of people seeing it. This was the big kind of celebration when we got in. So there is, whoops. I like this last statement from the Phoenicia log. On February 4th is the day we pulled into Fort Lauderdale. It reads, the fact that she made the journey all the way from her last old world port, which would have been the Canary Islands, to America using nothing but wind and current the entire voyage, completed in just 38 days, absent any of the death-defying drama of Kon-Tiki or Ra-type expeditions, is perhaps what makes this voyage so significant. The Phoenician ship made the voyage seem almost routine, ready for a dozen more. And that is what, to me, spells success in an expedition. If the ship made one trip, was battered to pieces, and barely, limped in to port, then you'd have to wonder if they really could have done this. But the fact that this ship was just as ready upon arrival as she was the day she left, ready for more voyages, was a big indicator. Yep, this is definitely doable. And so we're waiting for the rest of the world to catch up and say, holy cow, maybe Columbus wasn't the first one after all.
Okay. Paul has his hand up, and then Marlene. Go
Okay,
ahead,
Paul.
Paul.
I wanted to say thank you, Boyd, for your remarkable contribution tonight. It's been a fun presentation for us to participate in. A couple of points I'd like to highlight, though. You showed the mortise and tenon joints, and that struck me as being just a remarkable technology for that far back. But then if I recall correctly, and then you also had the nails putting those together. But if I recall correctly, George Bass in his underwater excavations found that prior to about 1000 BC, the cedars of Lebanon were being used by the Phoenicians to build hull-first boats. So each tree would be cut to provide one plank curling from the bow to the stern. And then they would be fastened together with mortise and tenon. Because they used so many trees that way, they began to denude the cedars of Lebanon. So by about 1000 BC, they shifted to the keel-first system, which is what your boat shows, where they would cut those trees into boards and then wrap the boards around, still using the mortise and tenon system. But the fact that your representation matches what George Bass found in his excavations appeals to me, and so I wanted to thank you for the presentation and raise that note. But think about it, mortise and tenon is not something that's that easy to produce, even with modern technology. And so the fact that they were doing it manually 3,000 years ago is, to me, rather remarkable.
True.
But let's applaud our predecessors for their genius.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I feel a need to kind of raise up the Phoenicians because they were overshadowed by their conquerors, the Romans, who turned them in, who said the worst things about them, wrote the worst things about them, as all victors do when they get to write the record. They claimed all of the advances. The Romans adopted purple. They adopted the Phoenician ship design. They adopted everything and called it their own. And I don't think they were the first, to do that, but the Phoenicians were truly remarkable, and they were the innovators of much of these breakthroughs that other cultures came along. The ones we study in school, the Romans, the Egyptians, the Greeks, and so forth, get all the credit. But it was the Phoenicians that actually invented many of these breakthrough things that they all took credit for. So, always for the underdog, I'm fighting for the Phoenicians and their place in history.
And Marlene has her hand up. Go ahead, Marlene.
I just can't say how much I've appreciated this tonight. It has been so fantastic. And, it's just hard for me to imagine how anyone, when they hear this story or whatever, cannot believe in the validity, the truth of the Book of Mormon and what God, does for us every day in our life. But I had one question. I'm still back on what you all did while you was on the boat, whatever. Did you have a doctor or a nurse?
We actually did have a doctor on board. Yep. We had a doctor. She was from Netherlands, and she was training to be a wilderness kind of an expedition type doctor. And so this was her first expedition, her first voyage. She was only going to go for a week, and she ended up going on the entire voyage. But yeah, she was very good.
Just thank you again so very, very much.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody.
It appears there are no more hands raised. We're approaching 10:30 in the Midwestern time.
Yeah,
So I think it's probably time for us to sing you out.
Yep.
Good night, the Lord is watching o'er you. Good night, his blessings go before you. Good night, and we'll be praying for you. So good night, may God bless you.
Thank you.
Good night.
Good night, everybody.
Night, everyone. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to you, Marlene. We'll see you next week.
Night.
Night, everybody.
Night.
Night.
Still recording. Robert, if you're there, or Deb, it looks to me like we should turn the recording off.